Welcome to the Warships Podcast with your host, Kellorn, Venacera, and Arun.
Hello and welcome to episode 115 of the Warships Podcast. I'm your host, Kellorn, and I'm joined today by Arun and Venacera. And since the government shutdown is still going on, we have Zoup back once more. Welcome back, Zoup.
Hey, what's up? I'm sure everybody's probably starting to get sick of me by now. It'd be nice to be back at work, I guess.
It's crazy that, sometimes you want to go back to work, but we'll leave that for offline discussions. But today we're going to examine just what ships are usable in the upcoming full ranked season at Tier 9 in the Arms Race mode. But to start out the episode this week, we'll talk about the fact that it is Arms Race, and it's going to be 6v6 in a full ranked season, which presumably will see the normal rank 23 to rank 1 with the normal number of stars. I would like to note that this version of Arms Race will have the 6 possible bonus areas, and those 6 bonus areas will be decreasing the detectability of your ship, healing your ship, a reload boost to your guns, a consumable reload boost, a maneuverability boost, and an increased fire chance of your shells while decreasing the fire chance of shells hitting your ship. If you are within 12 kilometers of the zone when it's captured, you will get the bonus, and it will last until the end of the battle. I will also note that the map pool for the season will be Islanders of Ice, Trident, Mountain Range, Warrior's Path, and Sleeping Giant. And so I guess without getting into the details of the ships that we're going to in just a little bit, what do you guys think about Arms Race as a ranked season, and how do you think it's going to affect the gameplay as we go forward?
Just to clarify, So the way Arms Race works is that instead of caps at first, you try to go into these small buff zones that appear. And when a friendly ship sails into it, all ships within a 12-kilometer radius get the buff, and the ship itself gets double of the buff, and you get a bunch of stacks on it. So your ship gets stronger when you do that, just to clarify to anybody that hasn't played Arms Race. And I think the Arms Race itself is pretty cool. I found it a lot of fun because at least when I played it, it forced engagements much quicker than what happened normally, because ships were much less likely to sit back, because if you sit back while the enemies push, the enemies get stronger and stronger because they get more and more buffs. However, in ranked, it might end up being that all of the burden to take the buffs will depend on the destroyers, and in that case, it might end up playing out slightly differently. So it will be, in my opinion, interesting to see what people will decide to do. But destroyers will definitely play a vital role in this mode.
So, Arun, before we get on to Zoup here, and I know Zoup's got an opinion that he wants to share, what do you think the effect of it being 6v6 is going to have on Arms Race?
Honestly, I think 6v6 means that people will stick together more, because 6 players is usually enough to be able to move as one big group. And in Arms Race, because you also have these buffs that have a 12-kilometer range, you want to maximize the amount of buffs your team gets. However, the buffs themselves also give points, and you lose points when the enemy takes one, I believe. Basically, it affects points in a way where you want to take the buffs. So it might end up being that you might have one destroyer go, to some far off distance to take buffs that appear over there instead of being with the entire group. And so that might end up being like a place where you see these super strong destroyers fight other destroyers.
What about you, Zoup? Did you like the Arms Race mode when we tested it? Did you not like it? And what do you think the effect of it being in ranked at 6v6 is going to be?
I enjoyed Arms Race when they put it live and we actually got to play it. I think this is what Warships is lacking right now, game modes in general. I'll be kind of frank right now. I don't want to say I'm feeling burnout with Warships, but I feel that it's getting very, very stale right now. And I think Wargaming really needs to make a concerted effort to try and rejuvenate things through new play modes, game types, or they're gonna start losing some of their player base, because we're 3 years on and still only in the actual game have standard battle, domination, and the odd epicenter every now and then. We had Bastion come and go. I thought Bastion had some potential. I know it wasn't the most popular game mode. I always thought with a couple tweaks they could have made it something, but that came and went. So that's no longer an option. So our arms race is really the only viable thing we have left outside of those traditional game modes. And I don't know if rank is the right place for it right now. It's a very intriguing move. And I know a lot of players like Sprint right now. Sprint's a lot of fun because you can advance very quickly, and it gives a chance for players without a ton of time to actually make some serious headway in accomplishing something. I think in regular rank, I guess my gut feeling is I'm going to give it a try. I'm kind of looking forward to it just because I like the game mode. I think it's going to bring something different. I think 6v6 is probably the right amount of ships to have in this game mode, especially for ranked. But my only fear is that with 6v6, you're not going to get a lot of variety in the players. And if a lot of players aren't playing, your team is really going to be winning is really going to be dependent on your team. If you don't have a strong team, or just one player decides to do their own thing or doesn't do the right thing, you're going to wind up losing. And I think it's going to get very frustrating for a lot of players with that few ships in there. So those are just some gut thoughts right now.
So one thing that I found interesting, Zoup, is that I actually had a lot more fun in the 5v5 ranked sprint season that we had than I'm having in the 7v7 ranked sprint season. And it's really remarkable how just having two more ships on each side makes such a huge difference in the amount of enjoyment that I get out of ranked sprint. And I feel like 6v6 is kind of the better of the kind of like a good middle ground between those two.
I think for sprint, yes, the fewer ships is better. 7v7, I haven't seen a lot of people enjoying it as much as the last, I don't even want to call it a season of ranked sprint. I mean, these are kind of back to back. So how can it even be a season when one just kind of goes into the other? But I think a lot of people were liking the fewer amount of ships. But for some reason, I kind of have a gut feeling that the way that arms race works, the way that game mode is, and the way that certain ships are going to get buffs, I think having fewer ships might penalize some teams that don't wind up with certain ships on them. And I know we're going to go into those ships in this episode. So I think for arms race, more might actually be better. But again, we won't know until it actually happens.
Speaking of game modes, I would like a game mode that encourages me to go to the middle of two brothers, please. But jokes aside, I also think that more players might be better in arms race just because of the ships you will be lacking if you don't have certain ships. However, I would like to mention that because you have less players on both teams, the cool thing is that what you do matters more. So if you're a good player, the game might end up being less frustrating because it'll be easier for you to carry your team. However, of course, the opposite is also true if you're not a good player. If you play poorly, it can have a larger effect on your team's performance.
Yep, I agree. That's kind of the point I was getting at, but you said it a lot more eloquently than I did.
I actually think that's a really good point too, Arun. I certainly found that I was able to carry my team quite a bit more effectively in the 5v5 ranked sprint season than I am in the 7v7. You know, like we were talking about, I played T61 pretty extensively in the ranked sprint season, the first one, the 5v5 one, and I was able to just basically carry the whole team on just my back in that. Whereas in the 7v7, I'm certainly struggling to do that quite a bit more. Vanessa, what are your thoughts about specifically arms race in a tier 9 ranked season? And did you have any particular thoughts about the map pool that they've announced?
Some interesting choices on the maps that they've announced. Some of those I really like, some of them I don't. With regard to arms race, I kind of wish that I would have tested it a little when we had it out, but I felt like it was one of those, this really needs work. And with the experience that I had with Bastion and some of other Wargamin's other attempts, at these things, I didn't really seem excited about arms race. Now, on the other hand, I am super excited about Tier 9 because this is something that we've been asking for a long time. But I will preface that with, I know many of us had asked for a Tier 9 ranked season because we didn't want premiums in ranked, but now we will have premiums in ranked, and I know we'll talk about that when we get to the ship section. But it's Tier 9. Many of my favorite ships in the game are at Tier 9. So the fact that we finally get this opportunity to play a ranked season, albeit it's going to be arms race, and I'm going to have some interesting things to say when we get to some of the ships that we go into because it's arms race. And I really hope that this is a very successful ranked season. But I do have a wait and see approach on this.
I think that's fair. Zoup, Aaron, did you guys have any particular thoughts about the ranked pool or the map pool for this ranked season? Specifically, I find it interesting that Trident is going to be in there. The other ones I've kind of expected because they're high tier maps, but they are including Trident, which we tend to see at lower tiers, and we are played quite a bit of in this recent ranked sprint season.
Trident is that's the nighttime map, correct? Or the evening map. It's kind of dusk, right?
Isn't Trident the one that, looks like a trident on the minimap?
I can't. It's escaping me right now for some reason.
It's the one that you normally see at kind of like that tier 6, 7, 8 range, where you've got the A cap that's got a bunch of islands surrounding it that does look like a trident on the left side, and then on the right side it's got the B cap that has a couple of islands in it as well. I was kind of surprised to see it in a tier 9 ranked season. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I think I know the one you're talking about. I didn't have a chance to take a look at the maps, but it does concern me that you're seeing some maps that are more suited to mid to lower tier ships on there, only because, yeah, you're going to be in spotting range almost immediately. And I mean, maybe it's a good thing. I also like when ships start fighting out immediately. It makes for quicker battles and it makes it more exciting. So I guess you can look at that both ways.
So what you're saying is you would like ships to start the game at full speed?
Honestly, I would like to see ships starting at half speed. I wouldn't say full speed, but
how
many battles occurred in real life where ships were at a dead stop and moved to it? I think, and this is getting off the topic of rank.
Jean Bart.
Yeah, but yeah, I think starting battles with ships moving at least half speed would probably knock 3 to 4 minutes off the overall battle time and make for a lot more, I don't know, a quicker battle experience, which isn't a bad thing.
The only thing
we're going a little bit we're going off the rails a little bit, but in conjunction with that, do you think that the torpedoes on the destroyers should be loaded at the start of a battle?
That's bringing up extra questions, and I will tie this into the current rank season coming up with all these points that are going to be popping up on the maps in random places. It would make it more intriguing as well if ships started out moving instead of being at a dead spot, because it's going to be an all-out race to these control points and everything. So I don't know. It'd make it more interesting. I don't know.
I think torpedoes should start out reloaded. That way it would be easier to kill or grief your teammates.
Sorry, Vanessa, I did cut you off a little bit there. Did you have another question in regards to ships starting out at speed?
Yes, two things with that, though. One, if you happen to load slower into the game, that can have a pretty serious impact on your experience. And reload or having torpedoes loaded straight away gives a major advantage over ships that have really long torpedo reload times, and basically allows them to kind of set up or even torpedo lanes straight off, and maybe have things like all of a sudden out of nowhere that you're not even ready for. You'd really be able to change up the tactics, if you had a really quick, or a ship with really long torpedo reload ready to go at the start.
That's a fair point. I guess we'll get into that on another day, maybe when we have somebody from Wargaming on the show. But I do want to get into talking about specific ships at a time. And I do want to start with what I think is probably the most important class for ranked destroyers. But I do want to preface this by saying that we are going to try and talk about ships from a couple of different perspectives today. We're going to try and talk about ships that are going to be more friendly for newer players. We're going to talk about ships that, more average player, more experienced player would find good. And then we're going to talk about ships that really, if you are a unicum or a really, really good player, that you're really going to be the ones that would be focused on getting the best and the most out of these ships. So keeping that in mind, I want to start out with the 2 USN destroyers that will be available in this ranked season, namely the USS Fletcher and the USS Black.
Both are insanely strong. Black in particular, like that ship will be the anti-DD ship in this season.
Yeah, and Fletcher is a tried and true destroyer. I still think through all this time, through 3 years, she still stands out as probably one of the most well-balanced destroyers in the game. She's very, very good. I don't know any player who's ever played the Fletcher and said they don't like her. I know some players might have trouble with her, but in the right hands, the Fletcher is it's a force to be reckoned with. And I think anyone who's ever played USN destroyers, it's probably the first destroyer that players absolutely fell in love with. And I know most that have grinded to tier 10 have probably wound up keeping the Fletcher because of that. I know I've kept my Fletcher. So I think Fletcher is going to be used by a fair amount of people. I don't know if she's going to be the best destroyer for this rank season, though.
So, like I said a little bit before, talking about Fletcher and Black, do you consider both of them to be kind of more suitable towards average players? Arun, you kind of intimated that you thought Black might be a little bit more advanced. Where do you guys think this fall on the spectrum of ease of use?
Well, I think Black is definitely going to be for more advanced players. You can find yourself in a lot of trouble in in Black if you push too aggressively, if you try to get in positions where you can use that radar. So I definitely think that the more skilled players that can take advantage of Black are going to be able to use her to good effect. I think that the Fletcher is going to be a good ship for pretty much everyone, all skill levels. I say all skill levels. It might be a little tougher for below average players or casual players, we'll call them. But casual players are probably going to struggle regardless of what destroyer they're in. But I think average players or the center of the road players will find themselves at home in Fletcher, especially when you start capping these control points, when they start seeing their speed their reload boost on their guns, which I also think also affects the torpedo reload as well, if I'm not mistaken. So
I believe it does, yes.
Yeah, so there'll definitely be benefits to having a Fletcher, and it's a comfortable ship for most players. So I'd say Black for the more experienced players. If you don't consider yourself more experienced and you do have Black, you might feel more at home in the Fletcher if you have the Fletcher.
I would like to echo the statement that destroyers in general might not be a good idea if you're below average, because destroyers will matter so much. I mean, I want to say that if you're trying to win as hard as possible, but I mean, if you're below average and would like to get better, the only way is getting more experience, so you might want to play because of that. But I don't agree that the Black is actually, while the Black might be more advanced, I don't think that there's like a player skill difference between the Fletcher and Black in that sense. I think you basically have most of the same tools on the Black as you have on the Fletcher, except you also have a radar on top of that. The torpedoes are kind of more difficult to use, I suppose.
Yeah, that would be that would be where I would, draw definitely the difference between the two. And to go back to Kalorn's, initial reference, these are, in my opinion, the best destroyers in the game. And as far as the Fletcher is concerned, I think it's the best ship in the game. And, it's definitely one of my favorite ships. And the fact that we could finally take it in a rank season makes it, super exciting for me. I don't want to say that this is going to be a deal with, say, average or below average. I think this is going to be more of an experience thing. USS Black, I think, will be better for experienced players, experienced destroyer players. If you're not a destroyer player, I don't think you should necessarily be taking a destroyer into ranked. If that is something that you don't necessarily have experience with or have been comfortable, in a more stressful environment, you probably should not be taking destroyers in there. Just like, you wouldn't expect someone to take a carrier into ranked who, maybe doesn't have experience doing with, carriers and the stress that can bring too. The main difference, the two main differences that you're going to have, an experienced player with USS Black is going to be able to utilize that radar at the right time. And also, really, it's going to come down to those sea mines. You're going to need to know where, to just spam those sea mines out into lanes of traffic that you feel the enemy is going to be going towards. The big difference is here, we're going to be going all over the place with these arms race cap circles. So it might be difficult to kind of anticipate where you need to go. And if the cap, changes and you're starting to move to another place, those sea mines might not actually come into effect. Well, the Fletcher, you're not going to be seeing, well, at the moment, we kind of feel we're not going to be seeing any carriers. And that means that you're going to want to use the speed boost. And speed boost is going to play a critical role in helping get to these caps. And while I love the Fletcher to death and the USS Black, we have to keep in mind they're not the fastest destroyers out there. Even with speed flags, and with USS Black, if you're taking the radar, you're not going to have a speed boost. So Fletcher is going to be a lot more well-rounded and be able to respond and actually torpedo, directly impact these caps a little bit better and quicker.
I would like to add, or I would like to clarify one point, or at least my experience was that with an arms race, you wouldn't really necessarily need speed boost. There were some cases where it would be necessary to get the caps faster to outrun the enemy destroyer, but I found that in most cases the caps spawned slowly enough that you could basically go through them more or less normally. So I'm not quite certain how much of an advantage speed boost is going to be. I think it might be very, very good when you're running away, because you'll definitely get into engagements over like a buff zone with the enemy DD, so it might end up who can disengage faster. But on the other hand, on the sea mine topic, I think the sea mines might not actually be that bad. It depends on how many islands you have, but because of the unpredictability of where you have to go, the sea mines might end up giving a nasty surprise to many, many players.
I agree with that, Arun. I just think that they are a little bit more difficult to use than faster torpedoes would be, just in most cases. That said, I do want to move on to other destroyers. We have quite a bit of ships to talk about, so we got to try and keep them a little short here. The next two destroyers on the list are Yugamo and Kitakaze from the Imperial Japanese Navy. And I want to start with and I think that Arun is a good place to start with these two.
So, you know how I've been talking about Harugumo is super, super strong on how much damage she does? Well, Kitakaze is basically the same, except she actually behaves more like a destroyer in most scenarios. And because of that, Kitakaze is just incredible. If you run into another destroyer that you detect, you are probably going to kill that DD unless they get really lucky on the disengagement.
I agree 100%. Kitakaze is going to be my go-to destroyer this season. And actually, strangely enough, I play Kitakaze better than I play Harugumo. I have better survivability, even playing against the same amount of tier 10s I would play in a Haragumo, and it's because of what Arun just said. The Kitakaze plays more like an actual destroyer. Its guns fire nominally slower. I mean, not even by a lot, I don't think. Again, your concealment, I think it's down to it's 6.3 kilometers with captain skills and everything else, I think. Your guns are blazing fast. They hit hard. They have the ability to do some very nasty things. And when your team goes around and you start getting that reload boost, this thing's going to be pretty much a minigun, spitting out HE at all ships. We talk about the Fletcher being possibly one of the best destroyers in the game. It's not going to stand a chance. If you pit two same skill players against each other in a Fletcher and a Kitakaze, the Kitakaze is going to win 9 out of 10 times. It's just the guns are a force to be reckoned with. So I think players that can capitalize on this ship are going to have very, very, very good luck this season. They're going to have a lot of fun this season in this ship. Yugamo's a good destroyer as well. And I would give it the edge on the Torps just because, you don't have one launcher like the Kitakaze. But out of the two, I think the Kitakaze is by far, Arun said overpowered. And I don't disagree with him on that.
I actually think one of the aspects of Yugamo that's very badly overlooked is the fact that she's going to be the lowest detection destroyer by a fairly wide margin.
I was just about to bring that up.
I think that her detection is like 5.45 or 5.5 kilometers. It's really, really low. And if you can leverage that and along with the torpedo reload boost in place of the smoke, I think that Yugamo is going to be a really nasty surprise for a lot of people in this season.
I think it's really going to come down to luck of the draw in these battles. And I think with as few ships as you're going to see here, there's the potential that you're only going to face maybe 1 or 2 radar ships. And then some rounds you could face a lot more because, and we haven't brought her up yet, but you've got battleships like Missouri and other radar capable ships. But yeah, I think for destroyer captains, I think they're really going to enjoy this season because they have the ability to make huge impacts by taking these control points and just buffing the absolute hell out of their ships.
Here's the thing about Kitakaze, and for my play style, I would choose Yugamo over Kitakaze. And for the simple fact that your detection range with Kitakaze, you're going to be spotted well before many other destroyers. Fletcher at 5'8", Yugamo, you are going to see that Kitakaze, well before they can see you. So that means that Kitakaze captain is going to have to charge in to try and get you spotted as well. If they try and smoke up and sit there and gun people down, the amount of radar that's going to be there, which I feel there's going to be a lot of radar prevalent, is going to make that tactic really difficult for a Kitakaze player. Well, yeah, your rate of fire and your ability, you're going to be very dangerous, but we know in past ranked seasons that it has always, always, always been about concealment. I mean, I can reflect on one of the tier 6 ranked seasons with why Hatsuharu, in my opinion, was so good because I could sit there and I could outspot everyone. And a good destroyer player will know not to go in full speed, to kind of creep up and get the other person exposed while your team sits there and annihilates them or forces them to turn out or smoke and then you radar. There's different tactics at play here, and you just can't take a random battle aspect or view of a certain ship and how it plays in random battles and expect that it's necessarily going to play the same in ranked, especially when we have arms race here. And while I like Kitakaze a lot more than I like Harugumo, I think a lot of people will use it. There will be people who will be very strong with this ship, but to expect it to necessarily go in and, contest caps or outspot other destroyers, I don't It's not going to happen.
So here's the thing you got to remember about this game mode. You're not necessarily going to be until that final cap comes up, the actual capture point, you're really not going to be contesting. It's more about getting to a certain point as soon as it goes live, and once you get it, it's yours and it's gone. I do see some of your concerns with Kitakaze, especially the concealment and being outspotted. But my answer to that is, if I am spotted in a Kitakaze by another destroyer and I don't see it, go ahead and open your guns up on me. I dare you. And unless the entire team's got me focused at that point, it's really not an issue. But yeah, I think I've talked about Kitakaze enough, and we've got a ton of other ships, right?
I'd like to say a word on Yuguma, though. Yuguma is surprisingly strong in terms of gunfire power. She matches the Z46. All of the Tashkent Udaloy, she has more firepower than the Nustrashimi if she ends up in the game for the time. And I mean, she's only like 20% behind like Fletcher and Black. So that ship can be surprisingly powerful, particularly because she has a lot of alpha for a destroyer, meaning that she fires her shells once and then goes away in some way. And if you get hit, it hurts a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. You brought up something that I forgot to touch when comparing the two. I think Yugumo is a very good choice for experienced destroyer players. Probably one of the better choices. I know for my play style is a destroyer that I would really recommend this ranked season. And I think, again, for average, experienced advanced players in this aspect, I think I'm going to lean, that these destroyers are probably a little bit more, again, for your experienced or advanced players, just because how critical destroyers are in ranked.
All right, well, you did bring up Nustrashimi, so let's talk a minute about Russian destroyers. So we have Tashkent, Udaloy, and the real wild card is if we'll see Nustrashimi in game before the end of the rank season.
I think all of them are mediocre. Like I mentioned before, they have gunfire power for the Tashkent and Udalai that is equivalent to a Yuguma, but obviously with worse torpedoes. They also don't have quite the same concealment. They have speed, but speed as a destroyer, I suppose it could work in this mode, so perhaps I might be wrong. But I don't think the Soviet destroyers are going to be that good. I'm not going to mention Nustrashimi too much because I think that's an anti-air destroyer. And since we don't have carriers, I don't think that's going to be very useful, especially since you are about to the Yugamo are about as weak as Yugamo is to the Fletcher in terms of gunfire power. So if you run into any DD other than another Nustrashimi, you're going to lose the gunfight.
Zoup, taking what Aaron has to say into consideration, the fact that the Tashkent and the Nustrashimi have a heal, how does that change things?
I don't think it changes it that much. For my part, I absolutely love Tashkent. I think she's a very good destroyer. I enjoy playing her a lot. I was able to do fairly well in her. I think there are a lot of players that like Tashkent. It's kind of a cult maybe, but I don't think that they're going to be well suited to this season, even with the heal. They're a very different type of play style, and Tashkent, you very much need open water, kind of like the Khabarovsk, not quite to the extent, but again, it's a fire from range type of ship. And I don't think that's going to lend well as far as the destroyers are concerned this current season. Is it Khabarovsk? Is it Khabarovsk?
Yes, Khabarovsk.
Khabarovsk. Okay, not Khabarovsk. Yeah, I'm not Russian. We'll call it the cat. It's a cat. It's a cabbie. It's a cabbie.
Vanessa, did you have any thoughts on the Russian destroyers?
Well, I don't play high tier Russian light cruisers that much, but I think I know a lot of people love the Udaloy. I wouldn't be surprised seeing them. If Nustrashimi was in, there would be times that I'd be tempted because I feel that destroyer is definitely a really good support destroyer and has so many tools that it has access to that would be kind of interesting and cool. But the one thing I wanted to bring up is, if there is going to be an emphasis on speed, and granted, I don't have personal experience with arms race, but I did watch a number of videos and seeing these, these battles play out. And if there is going to be a need for a quick response, a quick and fast response, the Russian destroyers would definitely be a good choice. Now, again, it has to really wait and see this all play out. But if there is, a pressing need for ships to get to a cap zone super, super quick when they do appear, it is possible that, here is an actual ranked gameplay type mode that could give Russian destroyers a more competitive advantage than we're used to seeing in previous ranked seasons.
Well, we do have 3 more destroyers to talk about, and they are the German destroyer Z-46, the Royal Navy destroyer Jutland, and the Pan-Asian destroyer Chungmu. And honestly, of those 3, I think Chungmu might be a really interesting option for this particular game mode.
Out of those 3, Chungmu is the only one I would think about using.
I mean, the Chungmu is a Fletcher.
Exactly.
I would say that if destroyers aren't going to be very popular, which I think is unlikely, but if that's the case, Chungmu might actually be the better DD to take, other than maybe the Kitakaze, because those damn torpedoes, if you go like full torpedo reload on a Chungmu, you can put out more torpedoes than the Asashia. And you have the same amount of reaction time to these torpedoes as Asashia torpedoes, except these can hit cruisers, which is going to be a large part of the rank battle. So Chungmu is incredibly dangerous because the only way to really avoid the torpedoes is to either know where the DD is, like all the time, and when they fire, or you have Hydra up.
So here's the question. Do you take radar on the Chungmu, or you take smoke?
I don't actually know. I think radar might be decent, though, because it can catch players out as well.
Yeah, I think radar would...
I think...
I was just going to say that radar makes a very intriguing choice, especially when you got blacks out there. I'm not going to say it'll be a counter to black, but it does level out the playing field just a little bit.
While you give up smoke, unlike USS Black, I think with the amount of radar that is going to be in this ranked season, I think you almost kind of need to take it, because with Chunmu, if you need to disengage. You're going to be doing that anyway when you're radared, so you're not going to be smoking. And Chunmu, I think for someone who, like, they're sitting there and go, oh gosh, I really wish I had the USS Black, but I don't. Chunmu is going to be a really good option, in my opinion.
So, Vanessa, my last question before we move on to cruisers is, we kind of passed over Z46. Is the Hydro good enough on Z46 to make her a viable option, or is the Z46 just not where you want to be?
I think it's usable, and with the what changes to Hydro, the uniform changes. I haven't played it since. I'm checking real quick what it sits at. I think it's 5.5? 5 kilometers. So, that if you put the sonar module on this, and you have like a cap that is sitting, where you could sit behind an island and really just kind of be a thorn in people's sides, the fast reload of torpedoes, it's not like the guns are not bad. I mean, you really need to make that AP work. But Z46 is, in my opinion, still a decent ship. And I think it's going to be more for advanced players, or definitely experienced players. But I think it's an acceptable alternative. You're going to have a fast destroyer with really fast reload. And if the maps are conducive enough where you could use islands, and maybe the cruisers are, not wanting to expose themselves so much that, you can kind of get in there, I think you can really be a thorn in people's sides, with the sonar. I think it's possible.
I think it depends on how many destroyers there are. if it is how I think it is going to be, that we will have quite many DDs, or at least a sizable amount of them, then Jutland and Z46 both are going to be pretty decent. Jutland will be good because she will be able to ward off torpedoes for their team because of the super, super, super long hydro. And the Z46, if there are going to be any kind of contesting going on with like the buff points, then Z46 with her combination of hydro plus smoke is going to be very, very annoying to deal with because, yes, the black has radar, but it's a short radar. You can live through that, especially if you use islands properly and, try to pay attention to where the enemy big ships are that will fire on you. But you can't really do that against Z46 because that hydro just lasts for so long that, the enemies can simply reposition themselves so that you might not be able to survive it as easily.
That was kind of what my thought was as well. So I think that most of the destroyers are actually pretty viable. But that said, let's move on to cruisers at tier 9, which I think are cruisers at tier 9 are a little bit of a mixed bag. I do find that they're better than tier 8 due to the fact that all of them have heals, but I really don't feel like most of the tier 9s are quite as dominant as the tier 10s. But that said, let's talk about them one nation at a time. And the first nation up is going to be the U.S. Navy, U.S. Navy with Buffalo, Seattle, and an intriguing option that we may see Alaska.
Yep. Alaska. I'm glad you brought her up. So I know we're touching on USN cruisers right now, but I'm just going to make a bold statement right here. Unless you have a super cruiser, there are few viable options for cruisers. Just to throw them right off the bat, the Royal Navy and France, the St. Louis and Neptune are the only cruisers I would think about taking out if you don't have a super cruiser. I think Alaska, the players that have it are probably going to use it just because it's Alaska and it is a super cruiser. They have the ability to soak up large amounts of damage. They have punishing AP against other cruisers. And when those speed reload boosts happen, it's going to make their guns fire quicker, that heavy AP. So I think Alaska out of those three it's not the only viable option. I mean, there are players that will fare very well in the Buffalo, and I don't want to make it sound like the Buffalo is a bad ship. I wouldn't want to take Seattle. I wouldn't want to take a light cruiser into this mix with the battleships that are going to be out there. So out of those, I would take Buffalo over Seattle if you absolutely have to take one or the other. But I think Alaska is going to find its way into a lot of battles out of the USN cruisers.
The only USN cruiser I would use is the Alaska. If the Alaska isn't available, I don't think I would pick any of the other ones. Yep. The Seattle is too squishy, I think, and she doesn't bring quite enough to the table. Buffalo, I don't really know how to put it, but she just hasn't performed very well for me. Sure, she can deal damage, but she goes down super, super quickly.
I think players that can leverage the elevation of her guns and just find a mountain to hide behind and sling HE might be able to work her. And again, you were talking about ships to use for the average and skilled player and everything. That was one of the focuses. I think Buffalo will be used by skilled players who have been using Buffalo and feel very, very, very comfortable in Buffalo. If you have only a few tier 9 cruisers and Buffalo's one of them, and you've consider yourself an average player, I might think about using a different class altogether, like battleships, because I don't think Buffalo is going to be decent in this season outside of skilled players. If you're an average player, you consider yourself an average player, and you have Alaska, you'll feel a lot safer and a lot more comfortable in Alaska, and you'll probably have a bigger impact on the game.
This is where Vanessa bemoans the fact that Seattle sucks.
Yeah. Whatever. No, it definitely needs both. I think Buffalo, could use a bit of a buff as well. No, I've seen some really good players play Buffalo, and I think we might be surprised a little bit But yeah, it's not like Baltimore was when Baltimore was tier 9, because Baltimore could just troll people. And while Buffalo definitely has better alpha, better just overall damage output, it can't troll people like the old tier 9 Baltimore used to. And I would say something about Seattle. If the maps kind of play out a little differently and, there's a bit of cover, you could see a player or two use Seattle. Just because of all the utility that it brings, it might be something that a really experienced player could make work. But I don't think an average player or, run-of-the-mill cruiser player is going to think, that might be a good idea. But if Alaska's in, I think a lot of people will like that and use it.
Alrighty. Well, let's move on to the IJN and the Russians. And that's the Ibuki for the IJN, the Kronstadt, and the Dmitry Donskoy.
Ibuki.
And I do agree that if you drive an Ibuki in this rank season, you're just asking to get to
why is that ship still in the game?
Honestly, I would rather play the Ibuki than the Dmitry Donskoy. At least from the time I played the Donskoy, I think Ibuki would perform better for me.
Yeah, I think both those ships are pretty much a no-go.
I will say this, though. For as much crap as we used to give the Pensacola back in the day, I think Ibuki's kind of taken that crown. And I'd be interested to see, like, a player take Ibuki and go out there and, hey, I did a full, rank out of the Ibuki and, here's my experience with it on YouTube.
You can't pay me enough to do that.
Speaking of the Ibuki, though, I think the amount of crap we gave to the Pensacola, we kind of ignored the Ibuki. I think the Ibuki should have got even more crap because she was a tier 9 cruiser while having inferior firepower to the tier 7 and tier 8s of her same line. Seems kind of weird.
Yep.
Yeah, with the only benefit being that you have a hull heal and its torpedoes are ridiculously good.
So here's...
But they're not. They're only 10 kilometers. Like, they're the same damn torpedoes that you've had for like 14 tiers.
And the firing angles suck on them as well, if I recall. I didn't play the ship long enough to remember that much. I think I slapped every single XP modifier I could just so I could grind through it as fast as possible.
So that said, let's talk a minute about Kronstadt. So we've talked about the fact that supercruisers are going to be a big thing in this. Do you take Kronstadt over Alaska? Because I think that I would.
I think I probably would too. I mean, I'll probably play both of them. I think they're both very good options. And again, out of the three ships mentioned, IJN and Russian, skilled players, they're not going to play the Ibuki or the Donskoy. Unless
Actually,
that's the
disagree. I think Donskoy might be played by some skilled player because she can be quite powerful, but you have to be very good at it.
I was going to throw an if in there. I was going to throw an if they have Kronstadt. But I do agree with you. I mean, a skilled player is going to make any ship work if they're comfortable and good enough in it. So, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that we're going to see an Ibuki out there just absolutely tearing it up. Again, a skilled player is a skilled player. But out of those three, I think you're going to see Kronstadt the most. And out of the Alaska and Kronstadt, I want to say you'll probably see a 50-50 split maybe. And I think the majority of players that have Alaska are going to have Kronstadt and vice versa. And they're probably going to flip back and forth between the two, trying to figure out which works best to them or to their abilities.
See, I
would rather shoot at cruisers in Kronstadt than in Alaska.
Well, yeah, I can see that, but you have to remember that this is going to be 6v6. So are we going to be looking at a breakdown of 2 battleships, 2 cruisers, 2 destroyers?
Is there a hard cap in this for
no,
ship
there's
type?
not.
So
No.
that is my concern moving forward because we haven't talked about battleships yet, and that's going to be fun talking about them.
We're almost there.
I will say this though. And I didn't mention this because I was talking so much about Ibuki, but with Dmitry Donskoy, if I see that in the battle, that is one ship that I'm really going to kind of just be watching out for and hope that it gets destroyed quickly. Just because I know with my playstyle, a ship like that tends to be a thorn in my side. And Kronstadt, I'm not so much worried as I would be Dmitry Donskoy. And I think Alaska would be a more viable option than Kronstadt. And I don't know, that's just my opinion and how I feel with. I think Alaska's a little more well-rounded, offers a little bit different utility than maybe Kronstadt can do. But if you are trying to definitely shoot at cruisers, Kronstadt's obviously going to be the better option.
All right. Well, we've got 3 more cruisers to talk about, and actually, I think all 3 of these are really interesting choices. We've got the German Rune, we have the Neptune from the Royal Navy, and one of the things I think that may be a really big surprise in this ranked season is St. Louis with her main battery reload booster.
I agree with you. All 3 are intriguing choices. And out of the 2, or out of the 3, I probably won't touch the Rune. Not saying she's a bad ship. I enjoyed the Rune a lot. But I played the Neptune and St. Louis so much better than the Rune. I really felt at home in Neptune and St. Louis. And what you have here is you have St. Louis with some ridiculous HE. You can set 2 fires on any ship with her with a salvo, with a well-placed salvo. And then you've got the Neptune, which you've got a 5-second reload on that. And just think about that when you start getting these reload boosts, which increases by like 25% or more. I mean, you're going to have one of these things humming to the point that if a destroyer is lit up anywhere near it, it's not going to survive the encounter. I think Neptune, if it can position itself in a spot where a battleship can't citadel it and blap it, it's going to be a very large nightmare for destroyers and even some of the super cruisers. So
Neptunes are food for Kronstadts. And
no, I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree. And again, it's going to be matchmaking dependent, and as all these rounds are going to be. So if you're a Neptune player that's very skilled in it, and you wind up in a round that has none of those, you're probably going to run amok. If you wind up in a round which does have them, you're probably going to play a little more cautiously. Doesn't mean you're going to do bad. So I think out of these 3 ships, Neptune is going to be more for the skilled player, and St. Louis, I wouldn't say is only for the skilled player. I think an average player can find some utility in it just because of its fire. I mean, it really reminds me of a Zoup in some ways. It's just got brutal HE, and again, like you mentioned, with that speed reload in it.
And the speed boost, which is going to be important.
Exactly. It's going to do some very, very nasty things. The Rune for average players, get wrecked on its sides. But I mean, it's not a bad ship, but out of those 3, I don't think I would use it.
Here's an intriguing thought. Radar Neptune.
I don't think it would be good. In fact, I think the Neptune in general wouldn't be very strong because one of her biggest advantages is her amazing heal. But you have to keep in mind that in arms race, you have the passive heal that takes over and over and over. And I think that kind of takes a bunch of power away from what basically the Neptune would have over the other ships. Also, speaking of the other ones, I actually think the 2 strongest cruisers would be the St. Louis and the Rune. The Rune because she can angle really, really well, and she's very resilient to damage. I suppose maybe the Kronstadt and Alaska could, give her a run for her money. But if you angle properly in the Rune, she's very hard to kill. And, well, the St. Louis, reload booster and all that.
I agree, and I guess what I'm seeing here is, or what can be taken away from this, I think all 3 of these ships, in the hands of the right player, can do very well this ranked season. And I do see what you're saying with the Neptune. So probably St. Louis over the Neptune, and for me at least. And I was only talking about these out of my own personal preference, but I think all 3 make a very intriguing choice. And out of the ships we've mentioned, the non-super cruiser ships, they're probably the most viable options this season.
I will say one thing about these three particular cruisers. And this kind of extends to, everything that we've kind of been talking about so far is, one, this is tier 9. And you're going to have some bit of experience just playing this game at all, because, you're not just given a tier 9. You have to go out there, you either have to spend resources, which you had to grind and earn. Even if you paid for free XP, you still had to get that free XP in the first place in order to convert it and then get these ships, or grind up the line and go and get one of these tier 9s. So at some point, you at least should have a vague idea of how to play this game. You're experienced. You may not be a great player, but you're at least experienced. And I think with Rune and St. Louis, those are some decent options, I think, actually, for average players. If you go in and you just try and do your thing and do some damage, I think those are perfectly viable ships. I think St. Louis is actually, probably a really good option for this game mode, and especially if it is one that fits your playstyle. I would be intrigued to see radar Neptunes, especially if you have the level of coordination, or I remember seeing radar Minotaurs, and I think it could be possible, especially if there's a lot of destroyers, and if you can get help with smoke from a destroyer when you absolutely need it, it could potentially be possible. But I think Arun, kind of touched on the point where you have that passive heal, and that does a bit diminish the quality of the Neptune, but someone will make these ships work. And honestly, we just really need to see how the meta plays out. I mean, we have an idea of how the meta is going to play out, but if it does kind of seem to orient itself towards a 2-2-2 breakdown, or maybe a 2-1-3 breakdown, there's potential there that cruiser player could be a real wild card, an influencer.
So a ship to segue into the next topic. The Rune has one thing I'd like to draw everyone's attention to. And if you look at the armor model of the Rune, then at the front and the rear, on the bow and the aft, you will have these armor plates that are 40 millimeters or more, meaning that even a Musashi will be unable to overmatch that portion. So if a Rune angles correctly and sails towards a Musashi cannot delete her, unlike, well, basically all the other cruisers, that is.
So there's one final thing I want to point out about the Rune and the St. Louis. The Rune has a base reload time of 13 seconds, which is quite a bit longer than you might expect. Whereas the St. Louis, when it has the main battery reload booster, gets it down to 9.5 or 9.7 seconds. And then when you put the main battery reload booster on top of that, you're down to 4.5 or 4.7 seconds or whatever. The amount of fire, like, I expect that the IJN cruiser players, the people that like to play Zoup, the people that like to play the Atago and stuff like that, they're going to be playing St. Louis this season, because that's really the only option to be able to do that fire spam, flanking maneuver. St. Louis, in my opinion, is the only one that can do it this season.
She's a French Zoup. And I agree with you. There are no other cruisers that are going to be able to do what she's going to be able to do. And your only other option, if you're a player that likes to spam HE, is going to be a IJN destroyer or even a Fletcher, which your fire starting chance will decrease significantly, as opposed to being able to use a St. Louis.
All right, well, let's move on to the last topic of the day, and that's going to be let's not give this second to last topic, the battleships for ranked in Tier 9. They're going to be popular, and there are some really intriguing options. And honestly, this is kind of where I'm the most worried about this ranked season, because of the premium battleships that are going to be offered at Tier 9. So first up, we have Missouri and Iowa from the USN. And funnily enough, with the buff to Iowa, I think that she might be a very viable option when I would not have expected it before her buff.
You said we're talking about the Jean Bart, right?
No, Missouri and Iowa.
All right. obviously, out of the two, if you got a Missouri, you're going to use the Missouri over the Iowa. I don't think the Iowa is going to be a horrible choice, but I think based on the other battleships that are going to be out there, I don't think I'd really want to use a straight up Iowa. Out of the two, I'd use the Missouri, and obviously you've got that radar and the I think that slight armor benefit to your front. So yeah, I think for average and skilled players alike, Missouri is going to be a good bet. To make the Iowa work, you might need a more well-versed and stronger hand in that ship than an average player can give it.
I think battleships in general will be the class of ships to play if you aren't very confident in your ability to play the game.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I think you will have the most amount of success in them. At least when I say that, I mean you probably won't be as frustrated by what is going to happen in the game, and it might end up even going very, very well.
You're bringing up a good point here, Arun, and I just want to say this to all the players out there, and especially the players out there that consider yourself average and you're looking to do as well as you can this ranked season. Battleships offer you something that the other two classes cannot, and that's survivability. And while you might not be good enough to do a lot of damage in battleships, just staying afloat and staying alive and being there and being focused by other ships allows the better players on your team to do things. So just being in a ship that's staying afloat is having an impact on the round. So don't discount that. So if you're an average player and you've got battleships, this rank season, that's probably going to be the way to go for you.
And between the Missouri and the Iowa, I would go with the Missouri.
Didn't cause as much misery as possible.
Yes.
Vanessa, this seems like a pretty clear option for everybody. Did you have any thoughts to add about Missouri and Iowa, or should we move on to some of the other ones?
Well, I can say that, that's probably the one thing that I'm not looking forward to is the constant, ever-present radar spam that is going to be prevalent, I feel, in this arms race rank season. And Missouri is one of the fastest battleships in the game, and Iowa too. And the fact that, you've got that speed, you got that great armor, those great guns, and you have radar with Missouri, there's going to be a lot of people who will be in Missouri.
I think that I think Missouri is going to be a very strong option. I think it's going to affect the battle a bunch, but I actually don't think that it's the most overpowered battleship at tier 9. And because it's very unlikely that we are going to see carriers, Musashi is going to be crazy. And kind of in a similar way, Ismo is going to be quite strong as well. So let's talk about the IJN battleships for a minute. Before we move on,
I think for the average player, or even the player that considers himself casual and not quite average, I think Musashi is probably going to be the best choice for them. And I'm telling you right now, if you consider yourself that, if you're that 40% to 50% player, and you want to test ranked out, you've got these high tier battleships. Musashi is probably what I would say you should jump into, because you've got a massive hit pool and you've got massive guns. And those two things alone are going to help you survive a lot more than anything these other battleships can provide you with. So again, average player, below average player, if you got that Musashi, I think that you will probably find your most success in that ship just on account of its hit pool and its guns. Because again, if you're staying afloat, you're doing something, and Musashi offers a lot you can stay afloat in.
Let me fix that statement for you. If you are a player and you want to play battleships in ranked, play Musashi.
So are you saying every player playing battleships?
Yes.
I think that Izumo is actually a stronger option for a better player than Musashi is.
Get out of here. Get out of here.
And the reason is that the penetration profile, aside from the overmatch ability, the penetration profile on the 410 millimeter guns of Izumo is better and more accurate than Musashi is. Like, I agree, Musashi is quite powerful, and for the average player, you're absolutely right. Get in the Musashi; it's going to be your best bet. But if you are a good shot, Musashi is frustrating.
Silence. You quieted us. There's a lot to think about right there.
I think that the stealth choice is Izumo, because I do completely agree with Kalorn. The guns have been improved so much on that ship, and it's one of the ships that it tested a lot. It has the ability to penetrate and just do damage in a way that a lot of the other battleships at its tier or even higher just don't often reproduce. Yes, Musashi has great overmatch capability, but Izumo, or the immovable object, in my opinion, you've got a ship that if you just kind of set it up right, can kind of linger around and just be annoying to deal with. Izumo can, I think, with a really skilled player, could produce some good results. I still think this might come down to accurate fire and timely fire based. And I think this is where Missouri is maybe going to play a little bit bigger role, because Musashi is incredibly dangerous. But just as Kalorn pointed out, those guns can often frustrate the hell out of you just because of their inaccuracy sometimes. So yeah, for most of the time, Musashi, I think, will be incredibly dangerous. But it's kind of like that old debate we had a long time ago with like the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, and the ability to delete something on demand when you absolutely need it to happen, I think might fall closer with Missouri, or even Izumo in this case.
Come on, guys. Could you stop lying to our listeners? I mean, clearly the Izumo is underpowered and needs more and more buffs. Come on.
Well, I do think that, like I said, it's one of those things where a skilled player, I think, is going to get a lot out of it. Izumo. Now, I'm going to talk about the two battleships that I think are the kind of the worst choices for this ranked season, and those are the Friedrich de Grosse and the Royal Navy's Lion. Do you guys think that the either of those ships is worth taking?
I don't think they're even worth talking about right now.
Well, I mean, I actually would have grouped the ships differently. I would have talked about the Friedrich separately, and then we would have talked about the 3 cruisers left. But I think Friedrich is... all she has going for her is her okay armor, and that's basically it. The ship just isn't very strong, I think.
I wouldn't take either of the two.
I'm actually going to disagree and kind of throw out a little counterpoint here with Frederick. And she's been buffed, not crazily, but something that has been overlooked here is her 6-kilometer sonar. You have a battleship that could potentially sail in, and you're going to need to be mobile in this mode, relatively mobile. You have a battleship with a decent secondary setup, a really good armor profile, and I would say that if you are an average player and you are used to German battleships and you are an aggressive player, like to brawl, and maybe Frederick might be for you. Your sonar actually can play a really big effective role here. And if you're secondary build, then obviously all the radar, the destroyers being detected, the other ships being detected, you're going to be able to brawl. And if torpedoes are thrown your way, you're going to be spotting them. I actually think Friedrich de Grosse might be a decent option for your average battleship player who wants to go in there and be aggressive and brawl.
Yeah, but the secondary build comes at the cost of survivability, because you're not taking like fire prevention and stuff like that, which I think as a battleship, a very important role you play is to simply be there and not die.
I think that you will see Fredericks. And I think that, again, it's one of those things where you get back to what type of player would choose a Frederick. A player, a less experienced player might choose a Frederick if they want to, they want to trust in the turtleback armor and they like the secondaries and things like that to help them do damage. Whereas a more experienced player might play a Frederick if they want to leverage the Hydro. And, but the problem, and I agree with Arun on this, is that if you take a Frederick and you don't take the secondary build, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And it kind of takes away from why you would take the ship. But if you don't take the survivability, it also doesn't make sense to take it. So I think that you're forced into some bad options with Frederick, and it doesn't have the DPM that Kurfürst has because of the extra guns.
Perhaps, but I think, again, if there is a player out there that wants to brawl, I think this is a decent ship to do it in. Is it going to be more successful than the other battleships we talked about? I don't think so. But it does bring, a wild card, if you will, in a 6-kilometer sonar. That, really the only other ship out there is your Missouri with a radar that is relatively short in its duration.
Yeah. So I guess none of you feel like the super heal on Lion is going to make her worthwhile.
I don't think so.
I think that the real death knell isn't necessarily is the fact that the Royal Navy battleships tend to stay at range, and you're just not going to want to be at range because you want to be within 12 kilometers of the zones, and I think that more than anything is what kills the Lion. But that said, we've got 2 French battleships to talk about.
You mean cruisers?
Battleships.
Yeah,
be nice there.
Whatever.
Be nice.
Battleships.
So we have Alsace and we have the Jean Bart. And honestly, of the 2, I feel like Jean Bart is the way to go.
Jean Bart, 22-second main battery reload speed. That's what I've got mine at right now with reload boost and everything else. 22 seconds. You cannot discount damage per minute. And when you start chipping away at the reload time, getting those caps, what is it, 25%? I mean, it's going to be tough because, again, like Arun was pointing out in a veiled sort of way, they're squishy. They're very squishy battleships. Alsace is probably one of my favorites in the game. I've been able to do very good things with her, but that's in a random setting. It might be a little harder in a rank setting, but still, 11-kilometer secondaries, blazing fast speed, and guns that can still put in some pretty good work against other battleships if you can get the flank on them. The Alsace is going to be a terror in the right hands. But Jean Bart, with that reload on its guns, if a skilled player gets a hold of her, I kind of shudder at the thought of what they might be able to do against heavily armored objects and cruisers alike. Am I saying that these are going to be great choices for everyone? I don't think so. I think the more skilled players might take these, players that know how to navigate around the map, people that know how to leverage terrain so that they don't get their flanks opened up, their sides. But again, I mean, the Jean Bart's reload speed just really, really, really scares me. Because those guns can do some significant damage. They can. I know dispersion on them can be a little wonky, but that reload speed is just insane.
I think this is going to come down to, how does the meta form and shift? I think you might see some experienced players take these ships, and especially if you start really seeing just the effects of, faster reload speeds and just that cascading into French ships firing those guns until they melt, you might see some interesting play here. I definitely could see, a Musashi or someone get really frustrated by just sheer HE spam, by, an angled Jean Bart just sitting there, just melting them away. Also, the speed boost on these French battleships are going to make them really quick to kind of respond to, the next cap point, and that's something to not be dismissive over.
Alsace with that speed boost is going to be a force to reckon with in the hands of a skilled player. It's a very, is it faster than the it's faster than the Iowa, right? Does it have the fastest base speed?
I don't think it's fastest base speed, but it is faster with boost up.
Well,
Aaron, do you have any final thoughts?
Yes, one thing though. Those two ships are going to have a hell of a time if the enemy team has Kitakaze or a St. Louis. They will just melt away because their entire armor scheme is 32 millimeters, which anything that can penetrate that kind of armor goes awesome, free damage.
Yeah, that is definitely the downside to all of the French battleships, in my opinion. The Republic is just as bad. But we do have one final ship class to talk about, and there's a reason that we left it for the end. Aircraft carriers. Right now, it is unclear if aircraft carriers will be allowed in a Tier 9 ranked season after the CV rework is released, since odd-tiered aircraft carriers will be removed. So the options will end up being either let Tier 8 carriers be up-tiered to Tier 9 ranked, or not to allow carriers at all. And from what I'm hearing, that we are getting rumbles that they will probably not have carriers at all, which does affect all of the options from before, and I think makes destroyers even more powerful. But that said, I think it's virtually impossible that Wargaming would allow Tier 10 carriers to down tier to 9 in a ranked season. But if they do allow Tier 8 aircraft carriers in, we're going to have a bunch of them. The Tech Tier ships will be Shokaku and Lexington, plus all of the Tier 8 premium carriers, which will be Graf Zeppelin, Enterprise, and Kaga and Saipan will be up-tiered to 8 as well, according to the most recent information from Wargaming. Since we know nothing about the premium carriers, let's stick to talking about Shokaku and Lexington for just a minute before we close out for the day. And since Arun is our resident CV rework expert, do either of these, the Tier 8 carriers, would they have an effect on a Tier 9 ranked season, Aaron, and would be worth taking?
If I were to play a Lexington in a Tier 9 ranked season, I would win the game. Well, maybe not 100%, but it would be pretty high up there because the damage output on HE dive bombers is obscene. And particularly because, well, I guess maybe not particularly. It might be that if carriers end up being available, people might go like full anti-air setups and then Lexington won't be as powerful. But the dive bombers are just nuts on that ship because they can hit really hard and start fires. And because they do multiple drops, if you catch a battleship that's not covered very well, you can set them on fire multiple times in one strike group. And the worst part is that what carriers also add with the new rework is that even if you blob up with massive anti-air, torpedo bombers now actually have a lot of range, so it's possible to go and do like a really long range drop from like, I don't know, 5 kilometers away or 4 kilometers away. And you won't see the torpedoes until they are rather close. Now you might go like, oh, okay, I can see the torpedo bombers, and they are doing something that looks like a drop. I'll know more or less where the torpedoes are. But if you're dodging torpedoes, you don't want to know where they more or less are. You want to know where they exactly are to be able to dodge them properly. And because of that, I think that carriers would be rather powerful. And that's talking about the bigger ships. If we talk about the small ships, well, unfortunately, with the way, at least in the rework so far, anti-air has worked, DD anti-air can't do anything to CVs. They just cannot do anything, at least from what I saw. It's very difficult for a DD to deal with it, even if you have like defensive fire and whatnot. So I personally think CVs won't be allowed. Even if they would be up-tiered, I think they would be a bit too strong at it. And I think the community also would be up in arms about it.
I agree. I don't think aircraft carriers are going to be in this season of ranked. B, if they were, I think this is one of those situations where having fewer ships in the round makes them so much stronger than if, you had a lot more ships in there to kind of balance things out with more layered anti-aircraft and everything else. Just the ability to put squad after squad after squad in the air with pretty much no fear of running out of airplanes or anything else. Like Arun said, I think it would just make them too powerful.
I mean, I did 1v1s against CVs as destroyers and whatnot, and I won all of them. Well, okay, not all of them. I lost in the Republic against the Midway, but it took 15 minutes. However, that was, a 1 versus 1 where the other player was playing the CV, and I knew exactly what I was going into because I was alone. I didn't have to worry about the fact that if the CV planes come in, other ships will fire at me. I could focus completely on the CV planes and focus on dodging those planes. That's not going to be possible in a ranked season. Even if there are less players, all it takes is one ship on the carrier side that will be able to take advantage of the CV spotting, and it'll make the life of DDs hell.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, is that it's the spotting aspects of the carriers that really kill DDs more than anything than the carrier's direct damage. But I think that we are going to close it off right there. I don't really want to spend too much time talking about carriers today. Vanessa, did you have any last thoughts before Aaron has a couple of announcements?
Yes. Let history never forget the name Enterprise.
Oh, God. Are you channeling?
Hey, we got to at least mention it. And come on, there's a lot of talk about Patrick Stewart and Picard right now. So, yeah.
Before I get us way off the topic, Aaron, let's get your couple of announcements.
Okay, so first of all, Streps is running a W25 torpedo jousting tournament, but I think this is EU only. If you want to know more, go to the contest forum on the EU forums, and you can win ships. I think Massachusetts was up there to be available to win. Basically, torpedo jousting is super, super fun, and I would recommend people try taking part in it, especially since it's in the contest forum. It means there aren't that many players who, will take part, so it might be fairly easy to get. The second announcement is that on the 12th of January, so 2 days from now, I will try to do a 20-plus hour birthday stream. I say
Don't
20
die.
Plus. Ideally,
Please
I'd
don't
like
die.
to do 24 hours, but from experience, I know that the last 4 hours end up being really, really difficult. So that might be cut slightly short. And I'll try to start around 7 to 8 p.m. my time, which is around 6 p.m. UK time, or 7 p.m.-ish in Germany, or midday in New York. And I hope these are time zones enough to extrapolate to wherever else you are.
All right, well, good luck, Aaron, and don't die, please. Be safe.
I mean, I can't really guarantee that I will have a 100% survivability rate. I'll be playing like 80 matches,
Not what I meant.
Also, I'll be playing on NA as well, and I'll try to do quite many viewers matches. So
Cool. Well, good luck. And do you have any prize support for your birthday stream?
Well, I will be doing some giveaways on the contributed containers and stuff like that.
Sounds good. Well, you guys tune in for that. We'll try and get links and Twitter recasts and stuff like that. Zoup, did you have any last announcements before we call it a day?
No. Just sure check my YouTube page out, channel, whatever. If you get a chance. Sorry, shutdown's dragging on, I guess, and I'm starting to lose my mind. But no.
Yeah, I've been watching your content and been like, okay, I agree with that, and I don't agree with that, and I agree with that.
So anyhow, I want to thank you all for having me on again. I do appreciate it. It has made my day worth something, at least right now. So yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah,
Well, glad to have you.
I will say, it's been nice to have Zoup on. I know he wants to go back to work, but hey, while the government's shut down, at least we have Zoup for us.
I see what you did there.
It's cup of noodles, but it's Zoup. So that's it for this week, folks. As always, follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Warships Podcast and Twitter at Warships Podcast for updates between episodes. Don't forget to check out Arun on YouTube and Twitch as well. And I believe there's a Discord server that you can join if you want to hang out and talk with us as well. We, of course, want to thank our amazing Patreon backers. If you're interested in supporting us, please consider becoming a backer yourself. You guys are the ones that make it possible for us to make these episodes every week. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you next week.